I would like to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Frederick Mujira. I'm the team leader at Water Journalists Africa and InfoNile. Water Journalists Africa is a network of about 700 journalists spread across 50 countries in Africa. We are so glad that this webinar is supported by Earth Journalism Network, a project of Internews. They are also the ones that supported the project that we are going to be launching today. For you journalists and scientists that would want to join us at Water Journalists Africa and InfoNile, feel free to go to our website. You will find a page where you can register and give us your details, so we can always reach out to you, when we have you in our database. But for you that are on Twitter and you want to tweet anything about this webinar, use the hashtag Pandemic Poachers and Media for Wildlife. Now, for it's just for not FOR, not yeah. So you be using 4 as in 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to ask some of you that will be able to put on your videos shortly. We'll put on our videos and we'll take a photo of this webinar, and want to see you after it's to know who you guys are and how it looked like during this webinar. But before we go there, I want to let you know that we are interpreting this webinar. If you are not able to follow in English, feel free to follow through Kiswahili. All that you will need to do is to click on interpretation at the bottom and switch to Kiswahili. You just, you have someone who will be interpreting for you. Yes. So also, as you may realize, we are recording this webinar. So we'll be recording this webinar and later we'll share it with you. I want to right now ask you to turn on your cameras and so we take a group photo for this webinar. This will last for a few seconds. Yeah, I hope we have captured that. Yeah, so I want to introduce our moderator today, who is Sarah Mawerere, a journalist I have known for so many years, and a very perfect journalist, an award-winning journalist. I will ask you, Sarah, to come in and talk about yourself briefly. But again, also do the introductions of the speakers. Sarah Mawerere is a broadcast journalist, working with the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, and also she works as a radio content producer. She also hosts, radio shows, especially on women, agriculture, and rural development. So I want to invite you, Sarah, to take over from this point.
Thank you very much, my senior Frederick, in the media fraternity and the media practice. Good evening, good afternoon, is it good morning to some of our people who have joined us. I would like to welcome you to this webinar, which is hosted by InfoNile. You'll get to know more about InfoNile, and this is the Pandemic Poachers, how COVID-19 has impacted wildlife trafficking and conservation in East Africa, and how the media can help prevent another pandemic. This is the project InfoNile has undertaken, and later in this meeting, InfoNile is going to launch this project or reporting project. But we are discussing surrounding this topic, the pandemic poachers, how COVID-19 has impacted wildlife trafficking and conservation in East Africa, and how the media can help prevent another pandemic. I have been part of the team of InfoNile that has gathered content. We contacted so many technical people. We have reported about this project, and Fred and Anika of InfoNile will get you people to know more about this project. Without wasting much time, because this webinar meeting is going to last barely 1.5 hours, but briefly, I would like to say that it has been more than a year since 2020. We've heard about COVID-19. And COVID-19 as a pandemic has devastated the economy, so many economies. And as you're aware, our economy, specifically Uganda, like me, where I come from, Uganda here, tourism, for example, is our #1 foreign earner. And you know how we are devastated, especially like in Uganda, East Africa as a whole. And you know that the interactions between humans and wildlife has been a problem. You know, COVID-19 has not only affected the collections, revenue collection, but the pandemic has also affected the wildlife, because some scientists are saying that this COVID-19 is a disease that is affecting not only human beings, but animals as well. So these are the diseases that are referred to as zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases are from the word zoo. These are diseases that affect both humans and the wildlife, humans and animals. And you know, COVID-19 has been also talked about as one of the zoonotic diseases. And the other diseases like Marburg, you know, there are worms. So the interaction between wildlife and humans is a problem. And so you know that our sector, tourism, which is part of conservation, is in danger for most of our economies in Africa. Across East Africa, and the local poaching has also increased. It is a vice also. Tourism has dropped as an industry. And as you know, the funds accruing from conservation has reduced. So reason, InfoNile has undertaken this reporting project, and is going to launch this project later in the day. But now, in our meeting today, I would like to take you through briefly for you to know how we shall move through this 1.5 hours. Now we've taken almost over 10 minutes, over 15 minutes, but I know we shall be there. It is so unfortunate that one of our panelists is not here, Mr. Vivian Iliazi, Commissioner of Tourism, Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities of Uganda. But we know the few people who have joined us and the media people who are also going to be part of the panelists. I welcome you. Thank you for sparing us time to join us for this webinar this afternoon. Before we go into other businesses in this webinar, I would like to ask Anika and Frederick to please organize and play the video that is going to portray what exactly we are on this afternoon. Please.
It is mid-morning at Lake Imburo National Park, Western Uganda. Zebras and giraffes graze. Buffaloes are down by the water, taking a drink. This is just one of the 10 national parks in Uganda, where before COVID-19, poaching had been on the decline. Across East Africa, following decades of rampant poaching, a slew of new laws had boosted concern for wildlife crimes. From 2015 to 2019, the three countries seized only 33,159 kilograms of illegal wildlife products, a reduction compared to early 2000s, according to the Environmental Investigation Agency. At the same time, Nigeria, Cameroon, and the DRC have replaced the East African ports as the focus of criminal trafficking networks in Africa. But COVID-19 has pushed East Africa's success onto a precipice as challenges posed by the pandemic threaten to place wildlife back into the hands of poachers and traffickers. The United Nations estimates that the global illegal wildlife trade is worth between $7 billion and $23 billion a year. In East Africa, governments fund conservation through largely tourism dollars, which fell by more than a half due to lockdowns and border closures. Nature, Ecology and Evolution 2020 reports that the COVID-19 crisis created a perfect storm to harm environmental conservation in Africa due to the combination of reduced funding, lower management capacity, and increased poaching as poverty worsened. COVID-19 restrictions reduced the number of people monitoring and surveying protected areas. In Kenya, the COVID-19 lockdown led to an uptick in poaching and trafficking of the pangolin, a shy mammal that was falsely suspected of spreading COVID-19 to humans. According to the Environmental Investigation Position number 7, in ivory and pangolin scales trafficking, Uganda ranked 4th, Tanzania 8th. Maasai pastoralist tribe living within the Masai Mara, a world-renowned savanna in southern Kenya, have seen their businesses come to a halt after the onset of the pandemic grounded tourism almost to zero. The tribe brewing to protect the animals in exchange for a share of tourism income, but businesses like beadwork have shattered, leaving families in need of emergency food handouts. During the pandemic, many people lost their jobs and thus resorted to searching for casual jobs. Consequently, many people have turned to charcoal burning and firewood cutting in the forests and parks. Poaching of wild animals also increased as a way for people to provide food to their families. Between January and May 2020, the Kenya Wildlife Service recovered 2.8 tons of poached bushmeat compared to 1.8 tons in the same period in 2019, an increase of 51%. In Tanzania's famous Serengeti National Park, the number of poacher snares found more than doubled in March and April 2020 compared to the first 2 months of the year. Giraffes have come under increased poaching. A big body mass fetches high revenues in the bush meat market. In Africa, wildlife-based tourism generated $29 billion in 2018 and employed 3.6 million people, more than any other region in the world, except for Asia Pacific, according to the World Travel and Tourism Council. While local reports of poaching increased, officially reported seizures of trafficked wildlife products in East Africa, mainly those transported to markets in Asia, saw a 51% decline in 2020 from a 10-year high in 2019. According to Infernal Analysis, there were also many fewer arrests of perpetrators 17 during the pandemic year compared to 62 in 2019. This was again down from a high of 174 arrests in 2018. Analysis and reporting by Infernal implies that these declines do not represent a sustaining curb of wildlife trafficking in East Africa, but more of a monetary blip due to travel bans, lockdowns, and delays in reporting. At the same time, the conditions that foster trafficking actually worsened. By the end of the year, the data shows that trafficking levels were back and even higher than before the pandemic. Governments, local and international organizations are stepping in and need support. The Masai Mara Rescue Fund is a loan program to help cover lease payments owed to Masai landowners in Kenya during this time with few tourists. In Tanzania, Serengeti Mission Possible Fundraising Campaign seeks support to help teams identify and remove snares set by poachers in Serengeti National Park. Conservation for Public Health, a Ugandan organization, is giving vulnerable communities a package of fast-growing food crop seedlings so that they do not need to rely on poaching to feed their families. The organization is running a crowdfunding campaign to support more families with food.
Hello?
Yes, sir, you can go on.
We can go on. We really apologize for the breakages in that small video. And I think maybe you have been able to pick something from there. You know, internet connectivity has been a problem across East Africa. I don't know how our colleagues you're doing it. In Uganda, we've experienced this severally in the recent past. So that video is trying to portray what exactly InfoNile with the team have put together to tell the world how tourism or conservation is pivotal to our development, to the development of our economies, specifically in the region of East Africa, and trying to tell you what has been happening amid this COVID-19 pandemic. So now, to get more from what we've seen on the screen, I'd like to introduce Fred and Anika, Mr. Frederick Mujira and Anika Magnus from InfoNile to come and tell us in detail about this, in detail but in brief. I'm saying in detail but in brief about this documentary and about the reporting project that we are on today. Please welcome Anika and Frederick.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me well, Sarah. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that. So I will be presenting this together with Anika, who is right here. I just want to give you a brief, background about this and who we are. Then Anika will come in and give other slides. But I just want to tell you that we are from InfoNile. InfoNile is a collaborative cross-border group of journalists with the mission to uncover critical stories on water issues in 11 countries. We've been operating in the 11 countries of the Nile Basin since 2017. We are a flagship project of Water Journalists Africa, and we're based in Uganda. We are basically a group of journalists in the region. So we come together and tell these stories. And we work with different media houses as members of this network. So we make sure that we tell these stories at InfoNile and also in our media houses. So most of you know about River Nile, the longest river, for example, would say in the world. Some might say maybe it's not, but we believe it's the longest river. And then we've been telling stories about this river and the basin. You would wonder, you see stories about wildlife and say maybe it's not what you've been working on since it's not water, but I strongly believe that we don't want the stories of the water in the Nile, but all that what makes the Nile Basin. The population, the 270 million people, the countries, the climate, the culture, the histories, all that is what we tell in our stories. That's what makes the Nile Basin. So we look at different challenges so that make our themes that inform us of what we should talk about, what we should report about. One of these challenges include increasing environmental crisis, such as climate change, water scarcity, biodiversity threats. These are the stories now that our members tell. We also are working to bring together scientists and journalists under one project, because you realize that there is kind of a trust gap between scientists and journalists right now. We want to bring them together so that journalists can take informed decisions, because researchers are the ones who have credible info. Also, lack of training, resources and training for journalists, and we are in there to make sure that we train journalists, especially in data journalism, to make sure that we help them tell good stories. Yeah, so our approach is that we work as local and international storytelling on environmental and scientific topics. In the past, we've worked on different themes. So what we do, we identify these themes, as I told you, of challenges in the Nile Basin, and then we make sure that we work on these with our network members in the region. In the past, we worked on water scarcity during COVID-19, climate change solutions, wildlife trafficking and conservation. This is a project we're going to be launching today. Biodiversity in transboundary lakes, a project we're working on, and foreign land is a project that we worked on and has been winning several awards. So what we do, because we are purely practice data journalism. We source credible data that is cross-cutting, across countries. In the Nile Basin, in the past, we have looked at water access data, rainfall and runoff, and land acquisitions. And we intend to have more. Briefly, I will tell you our approach that when we get grants, we call for pitches from journalists who are members of our network. So when we pick those that we are going to work with, from radio, TV, print, online, we mentor them, we train them in data journalism and environmental, science reporting, and then we let them work on their stories as them. They publish these stories in their media houses, and we make sure that these stories are translated, because on our website at InfoNile, we publish in Arabic, Amharic, Swahili, and French, apart from English. So we translate these stories. Our coordinators who translate these stories. And then later we create cross-border multimedia projects that incorporates journalism visualizations, such as interactive maps, drone videos, photography, satellite imagery, and infographics. So what we do at the end, we create actionable, interactive maps. We have so many maps on our site on infonile.org. If you went there, you'd find more than 8 maps that we create. We've been working with our partners, Code for Africa, who help us in this. So Uganda, now the journalists who are members of our network, come in, write these stories, ask yourself, what is the impact? We've heard from the past that, because we do assessment gradually, the journalists have told us, the stories that they write have helped, spark government investigations on, on those issues they write about. Some have, caused the policy change. Yeah, so we find that these journalists are coming in to write stories that are helping their communities, informing their communities to take informed decisions, and if there's any challenge, to work on it. That is Dorcas Wanjira, who will be speaking to us. We mentored her and trained her and gave her a grant to work on a story about Pangolin that you will see right in there. Yeah, so the project that we'll be launching is called the Pandemic Poachers, and then we looked at how COVID-19 threatened the wildlife conservation in East Africa. This took us about a year of working on this project. We were supported by Earth Journalism Network and GRS Biodiversity Foundation. So we worked with the 13 journalists in our network from Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Sudan, and we've been able now to publish 10 stories. You can find these on our website and also on the websites of the journalists that we've been working with. And these are, TV, radio, print, and online stories. And we have made sure that on the website for InfoNile, we translate these stories into different languages, as I told you, but most of these now are in Swahili. We don't only tell stories that are looking at problems, we have also been incorporating, solutions journalism. And if you visited our website, you'd find several stories, focused on solutions journalism. Yeah. So the final project on the effects of COVID-19 and wildlife in East Africa is the one that we will be showing you shortly, that Anika will show you. that we worked on and produced interactive map of wildlife seizures and the region, that looked at the past years, and how things were changing. So these are some of the stories that we produced under this project, and it's a story that, from these are journalists from Kenya. We had several from Kenya. One was Lena Posiboli. I strongly believe she's part of this webinar that looked at Kenyan conservancies, and how they were unable to pay lease land because of the COVID. You went to our website and also the website of Talk for Africa, where she is from. You read this story. Several, that were written. Locus, this is a story that Locus worked on about Pangolin, and how this mammal, the world's most trafficked mammal, how the COVID affected it, and how during the trafficking period, during the COVID-19 lockdown, what happened, and because it's believed to be the intermediate host of COVID coronavirus. So there are several that you can find. Sharon Otieno from Science Africa, Lina Mwamachi, who did radio story, for example, this story on communities close to Kenyan Tsavo National Park, and how these communities are planting trees to save wildlife. This one is from Tanzania, done by Prosper. Prosper will be talking to us about this, about conservation of chimpanzees in the Tanganyika region. And then we had Noto Miralia, who also looked at sewage, plastic chemicals, and poisoning of Chania River. That was in Kenya. Lastly, we had also Richard from West Nile, who looked at how communities there, are conserving wildlife through beekeeping. There are several stories that we worked on. Now I will invite Anika to take it over from this point. She will present some slides, and then we go to presenters and the speakers.
Thank you, Fred. Can you hear me?
Yes, Anika, we can hear you well.
There has been concern from one of our participants that the volume is a bit too low. So I request Anika to please increase the volume. If it means shouting a bit, please.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name is Annika McInnes. I'm the co-founder of InfoNow. So now to move on to the data analysis that we did as part of this project. We began the project with the premise that over the past 2 decades, there's been a shift in wildlife trafficking from East Africa, where you can see that trafficking was rampant from 1998 to 2014, to West Africa, which took over as a hotspot from 2015 to 2019. And this has been because of a range of factors, including new anti-trafficking laws and punishments, gazetting of conservation areas, and also efforts to incentivize local communities to protect wildlife. However, conservation is largely funded by tourism, as we know. So we were wondering, how did the COVID-19 pandemic affect conservation? So what we did is we requested for data from the Environmental Investigation Agency, which tracks illegal wildlife seizures through various different sources that you can see here. And we looked at 7 countries in Eastern Africa, which you can see on the screen. So from there, we analyzed the data. We looked at different categories, including the number of incidents and species per country per year, the number of incidents by species item, the number of arrests, the different transport methods used by the traffickers, and then look specifically at what happened between mid-March and end of the year after COVID-19 hit. So when we as journalists analyze data, we look at 3 key areas: 1, patterns and trends; 2, similarities and contrasts; and 3, outliers and exceptions. So for us, we started by looking at how the trafficking levels changed.
Anika, please increase volume. You are fading under.
Okay, we looked at how the trafficking levels changed from 2010 to 2020 and then specifically compared the years before COVID to the year after COVID. So we found that between 2019 and 2020, there was a significant drop in the officially reported seizures. And of course, these are the internationally trafficked seizures, which we know fell due to the border closures and the restrictions on air travel. So in this next graph, you can see how the seizures over air drastically fell from 2019 to 2020, compared to those over the road, which remained almost the same. So we also saw that the weight of trafficked products has declined over the years in East Africa. And when you go to the actual project, you can see in a moving map, which shows the weight of the seizures over the year and how they changed over the years. But what was interesting is when we looked at the monthly seizures, we saw that even though seizures fell almost to zero during the months of the lockdown, they actually increased as the lockdowns were lifted, with the levels in December even higher than before the pandemic. So this matched with the temporary drops in international trafficking. The conditions that foster trafficking might have actually worsened during the pandemic, including poverty, which leads communities to poach, and also less enforcement during the lockdowns. So we also looked at the seizures by species, which showed us that even though elephant or ivory seizures are still the highest, pangolin seizures have actually been on the rise over the years. And in Kenya, we saw there were several high-profile seizures of pangolins in 2020. So yeah, just a couple of tips for investigative data-driven reporting. You identify who is collecting the data already and request for their data sets, but make sure to ask for methodologies and clearly communicate this as well, making sure also to be aware of possible gaps in the data. As I already mentioned, the 3 areas to look at when you're doing data analysis: patterns and trends over time, and also at key moments like when the COVID-19 lockdowns were put in place. Also identifying similarities, contrasts, and outliers, and unusual exceptions to the norm, then trying to explain why those are happening. So you always want to do a bit of data cleaning before you visualize. And if you want to create an interactive map like we do, you need data with coordinates. That means latitude and longitude. And a couple of tools journalists you can use to create visualizations include Flourish, which we use for most of the ones in this project, Data Wrapper, and Mapbox. So that is just a bit about the data analysis that we did. But just to quickly show you the project, which we'll just share the link with you in case you're interested to see more. This is the structure of the project. This is the map, which I was describing, which shows the seizures over the 10 years. And you can see how they increase, but then they've actually been slowly decreasing since around 2018, 2019. So yeah, it has different sections for different countries, for different themes. So we invite you to check it out and let us know your feedback as well. Thank you so much, Sarah, and back to you.
Hello, Sarah. I think you are in mute. Yeah, that's right. You can talk now.
Oh, sorry, it was automatically done this side. Thank you, Frederick and Anika, for your presentation and for giving us that insight into what we are in today. And you were telling us how journalism is enjoyable with a lot of visuals, with a lot of figures, to tell a bigger picture, to attach a bigger picture onto a story. So that is the reporting project that InfoNile has undertaken, and you have had them over a decade. That's what they have been doing. And indeed, we are emphasizing the use of media, the role of media into curbing poaching, into fighting the zoonotic diseases, into promoting tourism, conservation, and conservation of wildlife, the fauna, all these that are important to the development of our economies. And as you know, this is taking us miles and miles. So at this juncture, we would like now to go into our panel discussion. And our panel discussion has panels that have been lined up here. We have communications people, we have the journalists, and we have who are going to share on the stories that they've done. And we also have the technical people who are going to share more about this work and what you're hearing about today. First, we are going to have our panelists. This gentleman is the communications manager at UWA. UWA is UWA. UWA is Uganda Wildlife Authority. This is the authority of Uganda that manages wildlife in Uganda. His name is Mr. Bashir Hangi. He is a highly skilled communication professional with skills in corporate social responsibility, crisis communications. He's a trained journalist, and he has trained in the areas of corporate communication, behavior change, and development communication strategies. He started as a journalist, as a practitioner, and as a reporter at some radio station, and as a producer. And he has experienced practical sides of journalism, and his experience is largely determined by the approach in public relations. Mr. Bashir Hangi would like to thank you so much for joining us at this moment, and you are our first panelist. Please, the floor is yours, Mr. Bashir Hangi from Uganda Wildlife Authority.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that kind introduction. I normally feel elated whenever someone reminds people that I'm a journalist. I've always told people that your first training is your profession. So my first training is journalism. I'm a journalist, and so that is it. And I will die one. And I'm always proud to tell people that I am a journalist. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share my screen here with you. This is the presentation that I'm going to share with you. Just a few slides. I want to go back into the intros. Sarah has done the needful, but I just want to share with you the impact of COVID on wildlife trafficking. And you know, when you talked about what the media can do to prevent another pandemic, I started asking myself, can media prevent the COVID pandemic, or they are talking about the pandemic of poaching? My understanding of this was that what the media can do to prevent the pandemic of poaching, because the media may not prevent another pandemic, although it can play a role. So by way, so this is my screen. I believe you are seeing it all. This is briefly about UWA. We manage 10 national parks, wildlife reserves, and our role mandate is conserve and protect Uganda's wildlife resources for the generations to come. We have jurisdictions over national parks, wildlife reserves, and we also supervise and offer technical guidance to private sanctuaries. And I normally don't want to say this, that we control 10% of Uganda's total land area. So, but I want to go quickly to what has been the effects of this pandemic. One thing I want us to know is that for us as a country, when the COVID broke out, we took long, of course, it started in December, and then for us in March, we had a lockdown, and we experienced a total shutdown of the tourism industry in the country. Nothing happened, parks were closed, all tourism attractions were closed, a total shutdown. That's one thing that came with COVID. The second one, there was a reduction of visitors to protected areas. And therefore, with visitors not going to protected areas, there was complete decimation of the revenue streams to do conservation and tourism work. There was loss of jobs. People lost jobs from the cities. People went back. And as such, people became jobless, restless. And you know, when a mind is restless, it is ruthless. That is what we say in development communication. There was loss of livelihoods. We have many communities who are surviving on protected area revenues in the national parks and wildlife reserves. Tourism activities, basically, the revenue that comes from tourism activities. There were loss of livelihoods because these people couldn't benefit anymore. There were no tourists going to do community tourism. They were getting nothing from tourism activities. And the effect was pressure on protected areas, because now these guys now turned to protected areas for survival. And what did this result into? UWA became vulnerable. Whereas it is mandated with protecting and conserving Uganda's wildlife resources, we became vulnerable. And just if you look at this graph, in terms of poaching between February and May 2019 and 2020, you can see this is a twofold increase in the number of poaching incidences. We are able to double the number of arrests and the number of suspects. When I talk of arrests, talk of a case. You can have 2 cases involving 10 suspects. So you can imagine 2019 around the same time, we had the 163 people arrested and then 255 suspects. But at the same time in 2020, we had 367 arrests cases and 531 suspects. So this shows that the number doubled. And this is the number of people who were arrested in various protected areas attempting to go and do poaching and engage in illegal activities. The reason is simple. When the president declared a lockdown, people thought that UWA is sleeping. They never heard him clearly because he said that UWA should remain operational. And what we did, we had to convert all our staff from tourism and other departments, wear uniform, carry our guns, go to parks to do wildlife protection services. So that's how we are able to get this kind of harvest. It was not a nice harvest, I must say, because our intention is not to arrest, but rather to prevent. However, people dared coming to these protected areas and they were arrested. So you see, we are talking about suspects that were arrested. Over 1,000 in the last 1 year of 2019-2020, we got over 1,987 suspects who were involved in illegal, in various wildlife activities. You see this legend here with ivory. And then we had the over 13,645 different types of poaching implements that were able to confiscate. Some of the people say that they are poaching to supplement their nutritional needs. That you see another legend there in handcuffs with the bushmeat. And then we are able to get around 4,314 assorted wildlife and wildlife products that we were able to seize. So all these play to one thing, that as the lockdown was biting, it put a lot of pressure on the people, and people transformed this pressure onto the protected areas for various reasons, of course, survival and others for business. We're able to recover 23 guns. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about wildlife conservation, people should look at it beyond talking to communities, beyond the petty poachers who come with spears, bows and arrows and pangas. We have poachers who come when they are loaded, they have guns, they have what we call full metal jacket, and they engage you in the exchange of fire. So we're able to recover 23 guns from poachers. Now, I don't know, people don't use these guns to kill an antelope. No, people use these guns to go for the big five. They want to kill an elephant, they want to kill a lion, they want to kill a leopard, they want to kill a buffalo, you know, they want to kill these huge animals. So as you can see, this was too much pressure. And remember, we're talking about 23 guns. They are those ones that escaped and we're not able to get them. We lost wildlife. Rafiki, you recall Rafiki in Winnie Penetrable National Park of the Nyakagezi group. We lost Rafiki. This gentleman who killed Rafiki said his intention was not to kill Rafiki. He went to a park, he laid a trap, he thought he would get a bush pig for meat. On his way back to check on the trap, they encountered the Rafiki's group, and Rafik charged at him and he speared it. That's the testimony from the guy who killed Rafiki. But you can clearly see that it was an issue of survival. This guy went to a protected area because they had nothing to eat. He was like, let me go and hunt and get something to bite. You see what is happening to our elephants. This is a trap. This is a wire snare. And this is exactly the pressure that they're putting on the protected areas and us in conservation, giving us a lot of work to do. There was disruption in terms of revenue generation. We can't do animal translocations, for instance, Annually, we do animal translocations from one protected area to another for various reasons. We are unable to do this. We can't do recruitment. We had planned to recruit 500 more personnel. We recruited 0 simply because there are no resources. Problem animal management, responding to people's call for assistance for problem animals. This was also affected. Well, we tried because we prioritized problem animal management, but we didn't do it as effectively as we should have done, because you need to have teams. We have what we call problem animal capture teams ever ready. They are supposed to have vehicles, fueled, always on standby and ready to swing into action. This was equally affected so much. So
Hangi, I would like to remind you that you have 2 minutes to wind up, because
absolutely,
we have to put some questions to you.
So the issues of censuses, we are unable to do this. So the other implication is the transmission of zoonotic diseases, reduction in community engagement programs, we're unable to do this, and of course, a halt on research activities. So issues of community benefits, we are giving 20% to communities. Without tourism activities, we're unable to give this money back to communities. These are pictures of interventions that we are doing in the communities. The role of the media showcase the magnitude of poaching and trafficking, show the syndicates involved in the business, show the impact of poaching and trafficking on the economy, the impact on livelihoods on the communities, give a message of hope. Not all is lost. Sometimes we paint a gloomy picture. Not all is lost. Benefits of conservation. Why should people participate in conservation? I think the media has a role to play. And then understanding and highlighting the species status. We have what we call the IUCN Red List. Where is it an endangered species? Is it a critically endangered species? You know, you have to highlight all this. I believe if the media does this, they will do a very big service to conservation. Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether I've exhausted my time.
Yes, you've exhausted your time precisely. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Mr. Bashir Hangi. No wonder you are the communications person, senior in the UWA, Uganda Wildlife Authority. However, we have some questions. Some participants here will be raising up their hands, because these questions will be coming to each and every panelist that will be coming in. We'll have some question here, Mr. Bashir Hangi. First, there have been reports of some setback or scale back of anti-poaching operations due to lockdowns and park closures. Remember the height of lockdown, and reductions in tourism income and diversion of law enforcement to deal with the COVID-19 in many countries, not only in Uganda, but across the region of East Africa and other African countries. At the same time, there are concerns that poaching, deforestation, and conversion of land to agriculture will worsen due to increased economic hardships that people are undergoing right now. Mr. Hangi, what is your take on this?
Thank you very much. First of all, it is true that the situation will get worse, especially if there is no deliberate will of governments to ensure that we reverse, one, encroachment, but also the issue of population is very important, human population. As our population increases, the land remains the same. The land doesn't increase. And as such, we are going to exert pressure on these protected areas, and therefore it's going to be very hard to do conservation, because there will always be conservation and settlement conflict, conservation and survival conflicts. People do not understand why you want to keep a forest or why you want to keep animals in a place, and when they have no land for cultivation, they have no land for settlement. I entirely agree, but we need also deliberate efforts of governments to come in and reverse this situation. Now, on the issue of diversion of law enforcement, I want you to give you the Ugandan experience. Actually, for us, we strengthened law enforcement. We have quite a number of units. Let me tell you, we have what we call an intelligence unit, which is operating independently. We have an investigations unit, which is operating independently, and also have a prosecutions unit. Now, because we have this unit on our own, And we also have a wildlife court in Uganda that is dedicated to issues of utility standards and wildlife. We didn't suffer the issue of diversion of law enforcement. Most of the people who get challenges are those ones who have to survive on police or other law enforcement entities to do their job. Here in Uganda, we have all the arms that we need to fight illegal wildlife trade and poaching. So this is what has happened. And then when it comes to a setback of anti-poaching operations, yes, because of resources are no longer there, especially where entities survive on tourism revenue. It becomes very hard to sustain anti-poaching operations. Even us, our anti-poaching operations have been affected. But we are lucky that we got partners who came on board. And these partners were able to facilitate and ensure that some anti-poaching operations continue. However, they also have their particular protected areas of interest. Someone will come and say, I want to support anti-poaching operations in Maxwell Falls National Park. So, but also you have issues in Windy, you have issues in Kidepo Valley National Park, you have issues in Chibali. So yes, anti-poaching operations have been affected and they have really suffered a setback. I agree entirely.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Hangi, being that this sector is too pivotal, it is very important to our economy. And we are in a pandemic. For example, Uganda, we've taken a second lockdown. And you know the virus might continue. What do you think during this period of lockdown will be done by OWA?
That's a tricky one. Actually, UWA also follows the directives of the president. But what we've done quickly, we have refocused our priorities. We have prioritized three key aspects. One, we have prioritized retention of staff. We don't want to lose any staff. That's one. Two, we have prioritized wildlife protection services. We want to ensure that the wildlife protection is not compromised. We want to ensure that whatever little resources we have, we do not touch on issues to do with wildlife. We want to continue facilitating wildlife protection. That's why I said we have brought all other staff now. They are in the parks. They are boosting law enforcement colleagues to ensure that we protect the wildlife. The other aspect that we have prioritized is human-wildlife conflict, because we know wildlife will always go out to protected areas and go to communities and wreak havoc, and we must be there to protect the communities against the wildlife. We must be able to do capture and translocate operations. We must be able to do rescue operations. We must be able to ensure that we protect the wildlife in and outside protected areas. So those are the three key areas that we've given priority under this current lockdown.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Hangi. For now, I'd like to make you rest a bit. Prosper, your hand is up. Prosper, you have a hand. I would like to suggest that maybe all the panelists come. We just have these few questions to them. Then we open the floor. What do you think? Annika and Frederick, what is it? How do we go about this?
Let's go to the presentation briefly.
We open the questions briefly.
Let's go to their presentations briefly, give them a few minutes each.
We could first have presentations, then we can come back to the questions later.
Okay, Mr. Kwigize, please hold on, and the other participants that are here on the platform. We go to the second discussant, the second panelist, and keep your questions. Please keep the questions coming to the Q&A. And at the same time, I'd like to tell whoever is listening to us to follow us on Facebook, InfoNile. Just type in InfoNile, go direct and paste us, and find us on Facebook, follow us. Also, our hashtag of InfoNile is Media for Wildlife and Pandemic Poachers. InfoNile for the figure 4. InfoNile, no, the hashtag, sorry for the mix-up. The hashtag is Media for Wildlife and the Pandemic Poachers. And there is also a request from our Swahili interpreter that whoever comes to present, please try to tone down, go a bit slow so that she is able to pick it very well and do it in Kiswahili to our Swahili-speaking communities. Now, next, we are going to our second panelist. This is Dr. Anton Collins. Dr. Anton Collins tells us that he has stayed in East Africa, particularly in Tanzania, for close to 40 years or so. He has a story to share. Dr. Anton Collins is a researcher and is a conservationist who lives and works in Gombe National Park in Tanzania. He was raised as a naturalist, mainly in the highlands of Scotland, and studied nature from geology upwards through botany, zoology, until the best part, which was primate behavior. Primate meaning the animals that look like monkeys. That family, every animal, the chimpanzee, the apes, they are put together and they are called primates. So Dr. Anthony Collins has studied this behavior of primates, and he has worked with several organizations. He has stayed in East Africa, particularly in Tanzania, for that period. Dr. Anthony Collins is coming in to tell us more about, he's a researcher. Let him share the good story about primates. Welcome, Dr. Anthony Collins.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Bless you, yeah. Okay, well, I feel I'm the guest of Prosper Kuzige because he was so concerned about the decline of the numbers of chimpanzees in the national park in Gombe. So I'm going to just tell you a few things on a small scale about one particular place to see what he can tell us about pandemic poachers. I mean, it's an interesting case study. Now, can I share my screen with you? Yeah, there. Good. So far, so good. Sorry for I'm not very technically advanced, you understand. Okay. Right. Good. The Gombe is a very small park on Lake Tanganyika, and it was formed specifically to protect chimpanzees during the 1940s because of immigrants from Burundi who were settling and destroying the forest. It was made famous by Jane Goodall from 1960 onwards with her discoveries about chimpanzees there, which made it be a national park in 1968. But it was a national park without tourism. And it is very small, just 34 kilometers square, and nowhere is more than 1.5 kilometers from the edge. So basically, from my point of view, it is all edge. And the thing which concerned Prosper was the chimpanzees have declined from maybe 150 through into 1980, but now they're down to 84. That's by last December. And chimpanzees are not great animals for recovery. Their reproduction is very slow, one infant every 5 years, and it seems that in our case, the deaths have been more. This just shows two famous females. This is Jane Goodall on the left, when she was young, and on the right is Fifi, which is like her favorite mother chimp. And if you look at Fifi here, then you look at Fifi here. What is wrong? Fifi has got scabies, and very badly. And she survived, but her child died. And it's just to make the point that the main cause of decline of these chimpanzees in Gombe is disease. Disease reduces them in two ways. One of them, there's a slow rate where from time to time individual chimpanzees fall ill and die, and we don't really know how. Sometimes we know. But the other one, which is serious, is epidemics. Like every 7 to 10 years, there are big die-offs where you may lose up to 9 chimps in a short period of 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Usually respiratory infections, which spread rapidly, and many of them are affected. Some cough in the chest and they die. This is different from normal respiratory infections, which they just pass around on every day. And it looks like these are new pathogens which have been introduced. They had no immunity, no experience. And the most likely vectors of these are people, either local people or researchers from abroad or tourists. So I must speak slowly for our poor Swahili translator who habari za poleni na kazi. We take precautions with the national park. These are typical precautions. Nobody with a cough or cold is allowed in the forest. Keep a safe distance, wear masks, limit the number of tourists, how long they stay. And those are good measures if they're carried out properly. If we look at 2 years ago compared with the corona year last, in the top line you can see in 2019 we had 4 births, but there was 1 infant killed and 1 of them died ill, an adult male disappeared, so which is a net gain of 1 chimp. Look now at COVID year 2020, we had only 1 birth, 4 deaths at 3 or maybe 4 respiratory, 2 others died of malaise. So there's a negative score, a decline in 2020. And when these respiratory infections came during March, 18 out of 55 chimps were affected, and 3 or 4 died. And because this was at the time of the onset of corona in the world, people said, probably the Gombe chimps have got corona, it's obvious. But in fact, there was no evidence to support it. The timing was wrong, and every evidence was it was a normal respiratory infection. This year, there have been no deaths so far. Now, when the corona lockdown came, we stopped all our field work for 10 days, but we became very anxious because we wanted to know if the chimps were ill or well. So people started to go back into the forest very carefully, and then we built our staff up by quarantining 1 by 1 and by later corona testing. And we also agreed quarantine measures with GONAPA, which is Gombe National Park Management. Let's quickly go to tourism. The park opened, it wasn't for tourism, but since 1978, for revenue reasons, it's opened and increased. National Parks revenue does not go directly into the park, it goes to headquarters. So Gombe's tourism assists local economy in a small way, just many transport operators and hotels. But almost none of the villages near the park gain by tourism, only some boat drivers who bring tourists. And so the local people are not immediately dependent on getting money from visitors such as these. This is in the 1990s, before people had to wear masks. And you can see the risk factor here. When corona came to Tanzania, in West Tanzania, it was recognizable not by people being ill and dying, but simply by depression of the economy. The government did not suspend tourism, but tourists stopped coming. The warden reported no tourists at all for 3 months, and they lost income by 80%. But this was mainly an impact on the national park itself rather than the villages. And I always think it's ironic that corona causes a drop in tourism, which was actually a good thing for the chimps. So it was a threat to the people, but for a while, it helped the chimps. Anyway, we've now carried on with standard regulations, and tourism is returning this year. Quite a lot of tourists now. So to go ahead, the research staff are using the IUCN regulations for African apes, but there's also help at hand against how to control the tourist threat. There's an IUCN SGA Great Ape Specialist Group in the UK and in Uganda as Conservation for Public Health. I have a project you can see here I have called Protect Great Apes from Disease, and they make the point that responsibility to protect apes is shared by different actors in order: the conservation area management, the tourists themselves, the tour companies, their guides, and the government. And this very excellent website for the tourists, their question is how to send it to the tourists and how to get it to the tourists before they come. As far as poaching goes, there was a prediction that people who lost income from tourism would turn to poaching. But Gombe is not a good case study for this. There's very little poaching in Gombe, no buffalo, no leopards, and the protection warden said there was no evidence of opportunistic increase in poaching during the corona months. They also managed to continue patrolling, and the Jane Goodall Institute also helped them with money for that. And all that was really seen is in terms of change is that the farmers outside the park, more of them have switched to charcoal burning rather than farming.
Doctor, I would request you to quicken the presentation because you have 2 minutes to wind up.
Okay, I'll wind up very quickly. In terms of looking at the longer term ahead, we think that the main way to security in this case here where we are is to involve the local community in giving them a stake in conservation. There are good cases of this in Uganda with Kasisi project and so forth. Tanzanian national parks do not share their income, but they do have a community relations scheme, education, and they give money to income generation projects and community projects. Jane Goodall has a community conservation program began in 1994, and it's now been expanded with USAID support to cover now 104 villages, which actually include a lot of chimps who are not in the national park. And it's a multiple program. It has reforestation, agroforestry, agriculture, health of women, family planning, many things together, with forest monitors patrolling the forest, reporting biodecay, and satellite imagery. And we believe this is the way ahead. But here are the villagers, here's the involvement of women and to get buy-in, and here is the land use planning, which is very important. If there are questions, we can come back to that. And also youth involvement is very important. We have this scheme of Roots and Shoots, which teaches children to value the environment, live sustainably, and make a difference. I think probably the best part of community conservation is to raise it to the One Health level. And the pioneers in this, of course, was in the conservation of Windi through conservation through public health. Those of you in Uganda know that. And we in Jane Goodall Institute were increasing our eco-health program. We're collaborating with National Park, and we have more health colleagues in the US to raise things to a One Health level. So on that point, I'd like to leave you with a picture of Dr. Jane with our botanist and 2 traditional healers who give the benefit of getting non-timber forest products through medicinal plants. Just a nice example. Okay, sorry for speaking fast. Thank you very much.
Sorry for speaking fast, you're forgiven, and you've made it. Sorry, and we've met you, Dr. Anton Collins, to rush, but this rush is because of the time. And I think we want to spare some time for some participants to join in and ask some questions. However, Dr. Collins, Anthony, there is something that is very pertinent here that you've raised. You've hinted on the diseases, and you said primates, which are chimpanzees, apes, monkeys. These ones are a treasure to Africa, a treasure. In Africa, actually, some people are proud. They say these are Africa's cousins because they are near them. The resemblance alone is like they look like them. And you know, from the foreigners, when they come here to view in the national parks, they are interested to see these primates, and they are treasured a lot. You talked about diseases that are striking. That is the main challenge in this area of primatology. We would like you to tell us that the causes leading to more diseases include things like urbanization, deforestation, land usage, clearance of the grass, and the like. So can you please briefly explain what are these root factors to the emergence of the zoonotic diseases? And the doctor, I would like also to ask you to mention again a bit some of these diseases that are disturbing this area of primatology.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think that the diseases which are affecting the apes, I don't see them necessarily being zoonotic. I mean, corona is obviously a zoonotic disease derived from people's maltreatment of animals in captivity in trade. But the diseases which are worst affecting Gambia, the respiratory diseases, it may be actually they all trace to this source, because influenza viruses, we have a new one in Europe every winter, and these all tend to come from cultivation of animal husbandry, like chickens, swine fever, bird flu, things like that. So I think the chimpanzees, the wild animals, have the ability to gain immunity to what are the natural diseases where they are. It is only us people who are traveling the world, moving around, bringing strange viruses from distant places that we put them at risk. So the main way to control those mortalities is simply for the people in the forest to be very careful. And it's true that almost everywhere that apes have become tamed for tourism or for research, they pay the price of dying from respiratory diseases. So it's like something we have to be very careful not to inflict.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Let's move on, colleagues. We shall see how to fit in some of the questions. I can see a lot of questions flowing in here and some concerns in the chat and some questions in Q&A. Let us see how to manage within the few minutes that are remaining to end this, to end our webinar. Now, we've said that the pandemic poachers, how COVID-19 impacted wildlife trafficking and conservation in East Africa, and how the media can help prevent another pandemic. Another pandemic is here already, and we are seeing that the media can move from this scenario of saying the pandemic has come, but it can intervene and suggest solutions to how this can be tamed. So at this juncture, I would like to invite we are going to hear from, actually to invite and hear from two of the media practitioners. These are senior people that have done wonders to report about conservation. And you know there is something very, very good here. You will listen to this lady, one of the journalists that are coming to present. You know, we heard that when coronavirus broke in 2019 and the world came to tense in 2020, there was a saying that the pangolin, this animal, is the cause, that it is the one that has caused this pandemic, coronavirus. Would like to know from one of the journalists who investigated this. She's going to tell us how she came up with this idea, and she's going to share how she has really come to tell the world how this pangolin has been put in the dock to be told that you are the cause. Is it true? Is it innocent or what? This lady is Dorcas Wangira. Dorcas Wangira is as a journalist, passionate about science and human interest features. She's a features reporter working with Citizen Television in Nairobi, Kenya. And you know, Citizen is one of the leading TV networks in East Africa, we can say, or Kenya. She has previously worked as a special projects reporter and news correspondent for KTN News in Kenya. She believes in the power of human spirit and amplifying the voices of those often left behind and at the fringes of society. The story is long. Now, how are you going to share, Madam Dorcas Wangira, about the pangolin? Please share on your story. You reported about the pangolin, which has been put in the dock, that it is the cause of the pandemic. Welcome, Dorcas.
All right, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. I'd like to share my screen, or I don't know, Dr. Collins, your screen is still sharing? Yes. Okay, thank you. So I'll just go to my presentation. I hope you can all see it. You can all see it?
We have seen it.
You can see it, huh? All right, so my story is Pangolins in the Dock. And that's just an illustration that was put up by our graphics team. And then this is a pangolin. All right, the unique thing about this story, or what I learned, when I first pitched this story to our newsroom, that's at Citizen TV, it was at the time when we were at the height of the pandemic, the death, the infections, and everyone was concerned with what was happening. But a question that was being asked globally is, what is the real origin of COVID-19? Dr. Collins has just mentioned that it is a zoonotic disease from the maltreatment of animals in the trade. So this was a very interesting question, but at the time, it wasn't something that many people were interested in, and it was not a very easy story to pitch. I remember I had to pitch it 3 or 4 times at first. And then
Sorry to stop you, Dorcas. I don't think we can see your screen unless it's just on my end.
All right, can I ask Annika to share it then?
I think,
Yeah.
yes, you can share, you can
Yeah,
continue.
and
Continue talking
Annika,
as you share.
all right. So Annika can share it because it has all the graphics and the points that I'm presenting it from. So yes, like I mentioned, it was not a very easy story to pitch because at the time everyone, yes, thank you. Because at the time the concern was more of the infections, the test positivity rate, the hospitalizations. So people would ask, why do you want to talk to us about wildlife and the pangolin, for that matter of fact? And not so many people had seen the pangolin. Even I myself had never seen a live pangolin. So what piqued my interest was this is the world's most trafficked mammal based on the data that is available and based on also the demand, particularly in Asia and even the transit routes. So if you look at that slide, I think that just the previous one, Annika, you can see where the claim, we could go, yes, that one. I think this was the time where there was the claim that the pangolin was the intermediary for the SARS-CoV-2 virus that was first from a horseshoe bat, and then it first jumped into the pangolin, and then now to human beings. So I think for me, I found this to be a very interesting claim. And then also the fact that the pangolin was this mammal that is the most trafficked in the world, and many people didn't know about it. And even in Kenya, we always say that no one truly knows its conservation status. So I think for me, after looking at this story, and then I pitched it to Infonile when they were having their training. And at that time, the story working title was People, Pangolin, and Pandemic. So along the way, we were able to change the story working title to Pangolins in the Dock so that we could put this animal into the dock like a courtroom scenario and then investigate each and every claim. And then also at the same time, look at its conservation status at the time of the pandemic. So I've just shared briefly on how, what made the story come to being. And then it took almost from April to December. The story was being published in December. So it took a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of interviews. I got to speak to a lot of scientists, particularly those working in Kenya. I spoke to a taxidermist for the very first time who works in the National Museum, and they were also doing their own research on pangolins, which they had tested for SARS-CoV-2 virus. I spoke to people from the Pangolin Project. I spoke to one of the directors of the Africa CDC, who was very helpful. So the lessons I learned from this story, and I'm just speaking on as a journalist and as storytellers, I learned that data matters. Data is very critical. Story matters. Data is not the story, but from data you can tell the story, and narratives matter. I got to speak to different communities on what they know about the pangolin, on how these communities have lived with these pangolins. And most of them have this approach that they leave them alone. They don't touch them, they don't interfere with them. But with time, you see people coming to traffic it and that interaction between humans and pangolins. Sources matter for journalists pursuing this story. Your story is as good as your source. Have multiple sources. If I just listened to one source and also not listened to other people, I wouldn't have had an important story. And then it's always encouraging to speak to scientists and see what it is that they're doing, because this was a story about following the science. It wasn't about opinions, it wasn't about myths and beliefs, but it was about the science. And then don't be afraid to start conversations that may seem complicated. People think that science is boring, the data is boring, but it's your job as a storyteller to make this important. New models and approaches to conservation. Now with revenues shrinking for tourism, how are these communities able to sustain a wildlife conservation? The Pangolin Project have a very interesting pangolin program. And because the pangolin tourism is not a big thing in Kenya, a lot of conservation for pangolins does not rely on tourism revenue. So they look for creative ways, grants, trying to understand how people can get interested through research. When you go to the museum, for example, people are getting a lot of resources to support in pangolin conservation. And then I'd say lastly, when pursuing stories of this nature, mentorship matters. It helped me a lot to work with mentors from the Infonile, Emma Kisa, and also one of the editors. She's called Rachel, who helped me publish this story for a digital platform, because it challenged me to tell this story differently, particularly when we could not get pictures from within. It really helped to also write more and write better. So my next slide.
Dorcas, sorry, we are behind schedule. Some other people here would like to put questions to some of you, to you all of the panelists.
Okay.
So I would like you to use within the next 40 seconds to wind up. Then you get a question. Yes.
Let me wind up very fast on the engagement we had for this story. You can see that feedback. One of our viewers told us, just go back a little bit. One of our viewers was like, one day our historians will call the virus for what it is, biological warfare. You can't hide the truth forever. People telling us about how people didn't know about the pangolins, saying that this was the first time they're learning about them, which was very interesting. Others still believing that, the next one, quick. Yes, others still don't believe about the pangolins being about the pangolins and their role in the COVID-19, so they call that a total lie. Others talking about great feature, let's stop trading and killing pangolins. And then towards the end, finally, yes, still more engagement we got from people. As I wrap up, the next slide, please. I think there are just 2 left. Yes, we had, just after the story, there was a major seizure for pangolins where KWS were able to find 6 suspects with this. And then in March this year, there are 3 suspects who were also arrested for locking a pangolin in their house, which was a very interesting follow-up story. And then the final slide. So that's the seizure that we had, and a lot of people saying that they were able to learn about the pangolins. And then also for journalists to go for more underreported stories on One Health, wildlife crime, domestic financing, and legal issues. And lastly, I believe there was this final interesting slide. Annika, maybe? Yes, this one. This was a story that I was also able to read from nature.com. And it was this year. And they're also exploring other animals which could be harboring the SARS-CoV-2 virus and why it matters. So I believe there's a lot for journalists to tell, and particularly on One Health. And then lastly, our verdict was that the pangolin is innocent based on the research and the data that was given. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Pangolin, the dog. Very interesting story. Thank you so much, Dorcas, for your effort to come up with such a story. This pangolin was put in the dog. Actually, people are commenting that it is the cause of coronavirus. So is the coronavirus caused by pangolins in the Western world or even in East Africa? We will get to know, maybe Dorcas will share in the few minutes that we shall be having. Now we have our other journalist who is going to share on his story from Tanzania. And Wangira Dorcas is from Kenya. Now we have Prosper. Prosper Kwigize from Tanzania. Prosper, you are number last on our panel, and you are not the least, but you are the most important person because you are going even to share more and maybe give answers to some of the questions that maybe Dorcas has already given us an insight into. Prosper Kwizere is a Tanzanian journalist who works with the German Broadcasting Corporation. German Broadcasting Corporation, which is BW Dockenwelle, and is a member of Mpanda Radio's board. Is also the chairperson of the Tanzania Community Radio Network. He studied journalism career at St. Augustine University in Tanzania. He also studied at Radio Netherlands Training Center and DW Academy in Germany. Mr. Kwizera, welcome. You are going also to share on your story. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and all colleague panelists, but also I thank InfoKnife and their support. Now, as already my colleague Dorcas said, most of our journalism life in East Africa looks like similar. And due to time, I'm not going to read word by word on my slides, because most of the issues I've already raised by Dorcas, but also have already mentioned by Dr. Anton, who is also my news source when I visited Gombe in Kigoma. So I will share my screen. Yes, so as I said, I'm going to share my observation on opportunity and the challenges facing journalists and conservation on wildlife and environmental in our country, especially in Western Tanzania, where I visited in Kigoma and the Katavi region. Kigoma, there is Gombe and Mahale, and the Katavi, there is Tongwe Hills, but also Katavi National Park. I won't go through word by word, as I said, but you can see the data showing how Tanzania is rich in terms of wildlife and environmental issues. And my area of expertise, when I started doing this research and news coverage, I visited, as I said, the Kigoma region and Katavi, and the map is showing the conservation in Western Tanzania, where on Hare, Gombe, Tongwe Hills, and also Katavi National Park. The map was developed by Jane Goodall Institute, and you can see the surrounding that area. There is a lot of people who are living there, surrounding the national parks, but also surrounding the national forest reserves in the area. So my story was focused on how people are engaged on conservation, but also on protecting wildlife from the poachers and trafficking. But also I was searching to see the impact of human increase surrounding the national parks. But also I was focusing on the COVID-19 impact to the wildlife conservation, but also in tourism. So as already said in the main report from Infonile, according to the Ministry of Natural Resources in Tanzania, the sector contributes to 17% of the GDP in Tanzania and almost 25% of foreign exchange revenue. So it means that the sector is dependable in a collection of revenue for Tanzania development. So the money is also used to support the Tanzania development through different sectors. So when anything happened to decrease this amount of revenue for our country, it means that the nation entered into economic crisis. As you can see, more than 600 people generated approximately 2.4 billion in 2018 as per government statistics. It means that the people who are engaged in tourism or wildlife tourism, there are so many. So when the film shaped, it means the life of people entered into a problem. So, as I said, my story was based on how people, how community in Kigoma and the other area in Tanzania are getting benefit from the conservation, as I said, and you can see in my story, I have seen the decline in the forest size that preserve wildlife and biodiversity. Unfortunately, the media pay less attention to reporting such news that reminds our communities on the effects of climate change caused by our own behavior toward nature. As we all know that the climate change impact, most of the impact is caused by the human, by us. So in the Gombe National Park, I found that the chimpanzees have declined to an extent that they may become extinct, as already mentioned by Dr. Collins. So this was also my focus, and when I I was there, I found that this is very important for media to be engaged because the community tend to believe media that can they can bring information, but also the knowledge to them to understand it on how they should be engaged in conservation. In these graphs, you can see the deforestation and the poaching impact in our area. This shows that the day after day, oh, my computer power. Oh.
Prosper, we seem to have lost you. You fading. Oh, whoa. We seem to have lost Prosper. What do? We have to. Prosper, are you there? Are you back now?
Hello, sir. I suggest we can go to questions.
Yeah, let's go into questions, and we have a lot of questions in Q&A here and some concerns. However, what do? Frederick, do we please try to guide a bit here? How do we do it? Their hands up. There are those people who would like to put their hands up. And again, we have some questions in the Q&A. Do we begin with that? I don't know.
Yeah, Sarah, we can begin with those who have their hands up, and we'll later put questions in the chat.
Oh, and I seem not to see many of them here again.
I'm back.
You're back, but you have only 40 seconds to wind up, and we go into Q&A.
Okay, thank you. I can say that during my coverage, which I experienced is that the authorities was not really engaging the community to create awareness for their own resources. That's why you can find that in a part of, for instance, in Katavi, the community were saying that they are not benefiting from the wildlife because the only benefit were going to the foreigners, especially tourists and government officials. But during, then I gave them the opportunity to share their views on how they can benefit from the wildlife. They said it's very important for the government to allow the community surrounding the park to access the bushmeat so that they can eliminate themselves on the engaging on a poaching, illegal poaching. And I'm happy that at the early May this year, the government were announced officially to start selling or to establish a bush meat butcher in Katavi region. That is the best impact brought by my story coverage, where I engage the community, sharing on how they can be engaged in wildlife conservation, but also environmental conservation. So I thank Infonile for engaging me in that fellowship, which brought the success in Western Tanzania, where nowadays people from Kigoma, Katavi, and Rukwa are eating meat from animals, from wildlife. So they feel now it's very important for them to keep and protect wildlife and environmental in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prosper, for carrying on, and sorry for the interference and I think the network was not proper there. We are just requesting dear participants, those who can hold on a bit, that we have some few minutes, like 10 of them, for each and every person here, at least to be answered. There are people who have put questions here, a lot of them. There are people who would like to put up hands. However, I'd like to start by reading some of the questions that have been put here. And most of you people will thank you. They are thanking Infonile for organizing such a webinar. So just to continue following us on Facebook, Infonile, just go to Infonile on Facebook, or hashtag Media for Wildlife and Pandemic Poachers. 4, the figure 4. media for wildlife and pandemic poachers. Most of our participants are asking for the presentations from all the panelists, and I think InfoNine will be able to get back to all of you with the best answer. And the best answer is yes, I think. So now, let me go to some of the people here. Somebody's asking, for instance, the mountain gorillas see great work of Gladys as Kalema Zikusoka in Windi, Uganda, with conservation through public health. And we would like to thank Dr. Gladys Zikusoka Kalema, Dr. Gladys Kalema Zikusoka, for any input in this project, in this reporting project. I, Sarah Maudet, I thank you. You've been in for us there, the media. And would like also to go to some question here. Watch the Pandemic Poachers video has been posted here in the chat. I think you can find it. With a lot you can find, you can get those links. I think they are here. I'm trying to get a lot. Data is so important for evidence-based decision making. So interesting to see the shift in trafficking from East Africa to West Africa. I'm trying just to locate where some of the questions are. Interactive maps are a joy to have in stories. That was such a great presentation. Thanks, Frederick and Anika. There are questions around. There are questions around here. Please see data here. We request it from environmental investigation agents and have uploaded it to Open Africa, an open source platform run by Code for Africa. I think people, you can get some of these links that are important, especially the journalists and other people would like to get this. The Swahili is available, and please, it has been very excellent here. The Swahili interpreter, we thank you on this chat. So many things are here.
Hello, Sarah.
Yes.
I realized Anika is putting some questions right here, so you could go directly to the questions.
Yes.
Yeah, so probably you can start from where Anika writes and says, Adela, you can ask a question. Let's hear from Adela, and then you can.
Very good, thank you. And I would like you to help me there. I was trying to locate the question, but I was not getting.
No problem.
So
Adela, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes.
Please open the microphone and ask.
No, my question was answered.
Wow.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Then Sarah, you could go to the questions. Just look down almost at the bottom of the chat.
Yes, Frederick, there is some gentleman here who is saying that Comrade Bashir Hangi raised various issues, including shrinking of revenue from tourism affecting the operations. However, we've been reading reports of East Africa, of our East Africa government seeking loans from world financial institutions or Western countries and the US. Does it mean the loans are not enough to support the industry? This question, I think, can go to Mr. Hangi. Mr. Hangi, Bashir.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mr. Hangi, are you there?
The loans actually the government takes, they are being directed.
No, we are not hearing you. You are fading. You're talking from far. Can you come nearer and maybe increase the volume? Mr. Hangi? Yes. Yes.
Device is ready to pair.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, yes, please.
Hello?
Yes, now you are on, loud and clear now.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes,
yes. Yes, Bashir, we can hear you.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Bashir, we can hear you well.
Can you hear me?
Just go ahead.
Oh my God.
You can't hear us this side yet.
I'm unable to hear you.
Go ahead, please, Mr. Hangi. Hangi? Meanwhile, maybe we shall get back to him. I don't know. Frederick, can you guide here? There is a question here.
Go ahead, Sarah, please. Yes, we can hear you well, Bashir. Hello, Bashir. Hello, Bashir, we can hear you well.
Maybe you can type the question. I think,
Hello?
no. Can we have some hands? Frederick, can you help me see some hands?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
I'm trying to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm not sure what has happened, but we are not able to get Bashir. Sarah, have you been able?
But if you are hearing me, just this is the response. The governments are getting loans, and most of the loans really go into tourism infrastructure. I recall we had a setup facility which was going into improving tourism infrastructure in Mount Rwenzori. The buses that you've seen, the Uber buses, those are part of that. But you see, we are looking at a bigger, something bigger beyond tourism. And here we are focusing on conservation, because conservation is the backbone of tourism, specifically here in Uganda. Yes, governments are getting loans, but for us, in terms of tourism, rather conservation, we are not getting the benefit of those loans to promote conservation work. That's the answer I can give. Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether you are hearing it.
We've heard. Thank you so much for your response.
Sarah, your microphone is off.
Yes, I think we've been able to hear Mr. Hangi. And I think Anika and Frederick, they are concerned. There are people here asking for the resources from all the panelists. I think you'll be able to take
we'll be able, if you register for this webinar, we'll be able to share with you the details. Yes, we have the presentations. Also, we have been recording this webinar, so we'll be able to share with you the recording of this webinar.
Thank you very much. There are other participants, some of them journalists, are trying to request if you can share some of the contacts of the panelists, especially Dr. Anton Collins. Frederick?
Sarah, that is also okay. We will be able to share with you the contacts of our presenters. We will do so after asking for their permission. We may not rush to give the details now, but after getting their details, then we'll be able to send you their contacts. Again, I would ask the presenters if you are able, if you would like to share your details, please go to the chat room and type there probably your email and phone number. Back to you, sir.
Dr. Anton Collins, there are some journalists in Tanzania and Kenya would like to get in touch with you. Would you mind to share with your contact? Somebody has specifically asked. Thank you, Frederick, for guiding. Can we continue? We are behind the schedule. And I think at this juncture, I would like to say thank you so much, our panelists, the journalists. Unless there is a burning issue, Frederick, can you guide on this? Maybe.
I am not sure we have any burning issue. We should be closing shortly. We promised that we'll be closing 10 minutes time. It's almost time now for closing. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah. Then we can.
Yeah, I'm sure the presentations, whoever registered for this webinar, you will be receiving all the presentations from InfoNile you've had. Would like to thank InfoNile, where I'm also operating, where I'm operating would like to thank the panelists for sparing all this time to be part of this the webinar. And we know that all this, what we've heard from here, will take us an extra mile to appreciate conservation and tourism as being very important to our countries. Thank you. I'd like to end here. My name is Sarah Mawerede.
Yes.
I'm also a journalist and also I'm doing other things. So Mr. Frederick Mujira, he is supposed to speak last and close this meeting.
That's right. Thank you so much, Sarah, for all you've done. It's been a good one. I want to probably let those who ask questions to Bashir Hangi that we'll be getting back to them. We have recorded your details and we'll be getting back to you after when we get Bashir. Probably you can have the chat in your emails. I want to thank you so much for attending this webinar. We hope to be getting more of such webinars. I would like to draw your attention to the project that we launched, the story project that we launched. You'll find this on our site, infonile.org. Please, you can tag us, if you are doing a story or doing anything out of this, you can tag us at Infonile or at H2O journalists on Twitter. And then you can use hashtag, Sarah has been telling this, media for wildlife, and hashtag Pandemic Poachers, and share your stories with us. So we'll be glad to read your stories. So we'll end it here. We thank you so much for attending. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.